So Maulana Saab's father-in-law was sick. I knew it from last month also, and we had been praying for him. Inshallah, now he's going to undergo heart surgery. I think next week, and we were talking about it. I have full faith in Allah that he will get better, inshallah ta'ala. And also one of our brothers, Dr. Tirgan, is in the hospital with abdominal pain. I think he is going to have surgery also. So I would request all of you to say 5 Amma Yujib while Maulana is coming to the member. Bismillah. Amma Yujibul Mustar'idata wa yaksifu su. Amma Yujibul Mustar'idata wa yaksifu su.
والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلوات على محمد وعلى مؤمنين مؤمنات, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yesterday, one of the brothers had asked a question about the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim that's at the beginning of every surah except for Surah Tawbah. And the question was regarding whenever these ayat or these surahs came down, when they were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa was the Bismillah revealed every single time along with it. So I checked with some of my friends from Qom who are experts and researchers in Quranic sciences. And the answer was, just like almost every other answer, is that there's a difference of opinion, which I figured. So it seems that it depends on somebody's understanding of how the Quran was revealed. So there's two different opinions. They say that when you look at the ahadith that are recorded about people who are watching the Prophet as the surahs and the ayat were coming to him, usually you don't see the Bismillah mentioned in that hadith. So some will take the opinion that means, since they were recording it exactly as he was saying it, since it's not part of the hadith, that means that it wasn't sent down additionally. So that opinion says that the only time it was sent was with Surah Fatiha, because it's the actual first ayah of Surah Fatiha. So that was the only time it was sent down. Some add on and they say that the Prophet himself, before reciting, would say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, but that wasn't a part of the revelation, right? It wasn't a part of wahy. He would just add it himself. And some, I think a minority opinion, even say that Bismillah is not a part of Surah Fatiha, but that's a very, very minority opinion, small opinion. So hopefully that clarifies it. So as far as the leftover questions we have. So if you remember, we had this, we went through this comment that somebody had yesterday about women's issues and things like that, right? This like long paragraph. So this person, whether they watched it online or were actually here and didn't say anything, so they tried to clarify. They said that the above comments, meaning what we said yesterday, the above comments were made when you dismissed the fact that most of the tafsirs were made by men and instead commented badly on the progressive women. So again, I don't know what much I can do if I'm not face to face with this individual, right? We can't really have a dialogue and discussion about this. I don't remember commenting negatively about progressive women. Now, obviously, it is true that most of our tafsir are written by men. I mean, that's just that's a truity of history. I can't really do much about that. That's what it is. But just because, and this is a point that I think needs to be understood, just because men are maraji, just because they're the ones who have done most of the work in tafsir or Islamic research, doesn't automatically give anybody the right to say that they're misogynistic or they're chauvinistic, or that if a woman had automatically did tafsir, then her tafsir would be different, or her fatwas would be different. You have to offer a valid claim for that, right, and offer proof for that. And in fact, we do have, some mufassirin who are women and who have given, for example, regarding the controversial verses that you know, right, like the chapter 4, verse 34, about striking your wives. There are women who have done tafsir of this verse and they've given the exact same interpretation. So it's not necessary that just because you're a woman, you're automatically going to say something different, right? And one other comment here is, usually when these kind of comments are made about, men and women are going to be different if they, are involved in sciences, like Islamic sciences, whatever. Not always, but usually it's the case because the person who's making these comments or has these ideas doesn't really have that kind of understanding of how Islamic law is derived or how tafsir is performed. Because if somebody's personal understanding or their personal opinion comes into tafsir, this is something, especially in our school of thought, which is haram. You can't give your own opinion about the tafsir of the Quran. Now you use Arabic language as a source, you use the hadith as a source, you can use other verses of the Quran. But a person being male or female shouldn't really make a difference when it comes in there. If it does make a difference, whether they're male or female or whatever, then that verse, that tafsir will be called into question. Anybody should be able to call it into question. Even a male should, if he sees another male doing that, will say, that a point that you're getting, whether it's a misogynistic or chauvinistic or personal opinion, that should not be in your tafsir. So this should be criticized by anybody. It's not necessary that a woman has to do that. And of course, if women want to come and study in the hawza, they're more than welcome to do so. Islam encourages everybody to study, especially women. And we have, specifically in Qum, there are 2 houses meant specifically for women, where you have women who are studying to the highest levels. So, and again, I've even been to some of the discussions and debates between men and women on specific verses of the Quran. So these things are happening. Maybe we don't hear it over here. So we shouldn't let our lack of information and our lack of awareness of what is actually happening in the Islamic academic world lead to kind of comments like this. But again, if this individual wants to speak now, later, anytime, inshallah we'll try to offer a discussion and an answer. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala What was the moment or series of events in your life that provided the impetus for you to dedicate your life to studying Islam and becoming closer to the faith? So I think this is another repeat question. Somebody had asked something similar before. So I'll give the quick shortened version, or shorter than the shortened version. Which was basically, I wasn't very religious when I was younger. I was raised in a typical Desi cultural Shia household, and I started moving farther and farther away. When I got to college, I started to do my own research, and then I realized that there actually might be something worthwhile studying in Islam, and specifically Shia Islam. And then fast forward, I had consulted certain ulama, and they said, given my background, me being born and raised in the West, and having a certain approach to Islamic sciences, wanting to, having an interest in philosophy, theology, science, psychology, all these ideas, one alim had advised that I should go to the Hawza study and come back, because I may be able to address some of these issues better than, let's say, somebody who was born and raised in a different country. Because their approach and their ability to handle contemporary issues might come from a different perspective. So I was advised to do so, and that's why I do that. Next question. Is sending la'na on figures in Islamic history who have contributed to the shahada of Imam Hussein alayhi salam allowed? So is sending la'na on these historical figures allowed? So they say, for example, the companions of Rasulullah. So la'na, we talked a little bit about the concept of performing or sending la'an on Yom al-Ashura when we were reciting Ziyat al-Ashura. So I don't want to repeat that. But sometimes, just for those who might not have been there, the concept of la'na in Islam, especially amongst us, is something misunderstood. So I would encourage those who have just this general idea that it means to damn somebody or to curse somebody, do some research and see the other understandings, the deeper understandings about la'na that are available. Regardless, are we allowed to send la'na? So it's going to depend on where we are, who we're with, things like that. So the simple answer is this: yes, with conditions. Now the conditions would be this. Obviously we know that the figures that have led up and participated and helped in allowing Imam Hussein alayhi salam to become shaheed, some of those individuals are revered by other schools of thought. So now it depends on what do we mean that they aided and they helped and they participated. Right? Somebody like Yazid, that should be easy. La'natullah alayh. That shouldn't be a problem, because even members of the other school of thought, you might have one kind of small school of thought that says that he's okay, but the majority of the Ahlul Sunnah and obviously every Shia knows that this person didn't have the right for Khilafah. They were a fasiq and a munafiq and everything, right? They weren't a good Muslim, if you could even call Yazid a Muslim. So these kind of individuals, it's obvious. Now, with some of the other characters, it could be a bit tougher. For example, Umar ibn Sa'ad. So sometimes he's revered by the other schools of thought. Shimr, not so much. But some of the other companions of the Prophet who were there at Karbala, they might be revered by other schools of thought. So a typical rule that our scholars give is this: if you want to send la'an by yourself or in a group of other Shias, they say fine. But if it's going to be around other members of other schools of thought, or people that revere these other people, then you might want to kind of hold back. It doesn't really make sense. Because if you upset them, you're not bridging that gap to have a conversation with them. If somebody wants to come and talk to me, and the first thing to do is send la'na on somebody that I like, I'm probably not going to want to talk to them afterwards, right? And especially since, I remember one of the questions that we answered a few days ago, or a week ago, was about how do we teach Sunnis and other people about the episode of Karbala. Well, if you want to teach them, definitely la'na is not the way to go. That's not going to be the first thing you're going to say, right? Now, there's a way you can maybe get them to that point, but that's, I would call like an additional secondary discussion, right? That's not the main purpose. So, again, to conclude, is sending la'na on them allowed? Yes, as long as it won't cause harm to other individuals. So the fatwa that many of our maraji have given, for example, Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, and many others, they've said that to curse or to insult the wives of the Prophet, and some of them will also add companions, they'll say is not allowed, right? And sometimes when you look deeper, they also say in private is not a good idea as well. So again, from a practical point of view, this doesn't make sense for us to do. Certain characters that we know that it's agreed upon by everybody that these were characters in Islamic history that don't have any sort of fadila, they have no value, and there should be no problem with that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala. Another point to consider as well, outside of Ziyaratul Ashura, put that aside, do we have any hadith and narrations of the imams themselves sending la'na like this? So it's a question, you guys can do the research and ask someone else if you'd like. Next question. What would you say about the mispronunciation that is so rife in the religion, especially in the clergy, the ulama? So we talked yesterday we answered the question about what are the conditions for somebody to lead salah, right? To be the imam in jama'ah. And one of those conditions is that they have to be able to pray properly, obviously. And one of the conditions of praying properly is to pronounce Arabic properly. Unfortunately, we said that many in our community are still working on that, right? Inshallah, we all get the tawfiq to improve our pronunciation. Now, sometimes ulama or community leaders or speakers or students of the hawza, people who come and lead salah, unfortunately, their pronunciation, I can't even say it's not good, it's wrong, it's just incorrect, right? They pronounce it incorrectly. Now, the questioner is asking, what do I say about it? I say, it's sad that it's happening, but it's happening, unfortunately. People in the hawza are trying to correct this. I'll give you an example. In our school, everybody has to go through a salah test at some point in their hawza career. That they have to go and pray in front of one of their teachers, or at least recite the surahs and all the parts of salah, and they check their pronunciation. Now, I can't say that every school and every hawza does that. Should they do that? Probably. But we have to also remember that some of the other schools, let's say that are not in the Arab world, right? So Iran or in India or Pakistan. So any non-Arab based hausa, there's a good chance that the original pronunciation from their own languages will kind of bleed into their Arabic. And sometimes that even happens when they are scholars and ulama. And because for whatever reason they haven't been corrected over time, they just don't know that they're saying it wrong, and they come and they lead prayers. So if you do, and if you have certainty that they're saying something wrong, then if you can, with humility, obviously, you should come and ask that scholar that's there, ask them about the pronunciation. Say, I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Could you just, explain to me or show me why you're pronouncing it this way? And you could say, when I hear somebody whose original language is Arabic, I hear them say gofa, not gosa, as an example. So could you explain that, right? We don't want to accuse them, obviously, but we want to, if we can, bring their attention to it. Please recommend a book or resource that speaks about the relationship between husband and wife and what is allowed and what is not. So two types of resources. The one that is most fundamental is, again, like I've been saying many nights, the Tawdi al-Masail. You have to know at least what are the rules, what is wajib for a man to do for his wife, and what is wajib for a wife to do for her husband. So that needs to be known. And of course the mustahabat, what's haram, all those things. So you should look into the fatwa book of your own marja. Now, talking about more of the philosophy of marriage, or maybe some tips on communication or whatever, there are a lot of books that are there, a lot that have been translated from, let's say, Farsi or Arabic, and even some that have been specifically written in English. So if you just Google or go on alislam.org, just search the keyword marriage or family life, something like that, you'll find a lot of interesting books. So, say for example, Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi of Toronto, so he has Marriage and Morals in Islam, which is an excellent book. I can't remember exactly if he talked about the rights between husband and wife, but it's a good book, especially for those who are interested in getting married. There's another book too, I don't remember the name, but it goes through a lot of the typical issues that married couples will go through. So again, just go on alislam.org, search marriage, and then a lot of books will come up there. Okay. The next one is a comment, not a question. And there is a clarifying comment that I just saw on Slido a few minutes ago. Okay. So the first comment is this. Religion is man-made. I'm positive. Too bad this religion is being forced down my throat. And then they clarified it, I think, saying, in reference to the comment, this one they made, I was under the impression that, first of all, this forum is for people who believe in Shia Islam and clarify your concepts, but to strengthen your beliefs, not vice versa. So I don't really understand the comment. Sorry. If you're here and you want to clarify, you can clarify. If you want to do it in private, you can do it after the lecture. But as far as saying religion is man-made, well, we don't believe that. We believe that it's sent down from Allah. Inna deen indallah al-Islam. So it's God's religion. Yes, it transmitted through human beings. But there's nothing wrong with things being transmitted through human beings. That's the only way we're going to get it, right? So just because something is passed down through the hands of people doesn't make it weaker or wronger or more wrong. So and the person saying I'm positive. Well, that's fine, but there's a good chance you're wrong. So it'd be good to open your mind and maybe research or ask questions rather than just giving your opinion. Too bad this religion's being forced down my throat. That is too bad. That is definitely too bad. And inshallah, that should not be the case. So whoever your parents are, your family is, or whoever's forcing it down your throat, inshallah, don't throw it up on them, number one. And parents, don't force religion down your kid's throat, right? Interact with them, communicate with them, teach them, have a dialogue with them, learn with them, right?
Medicine is the same way. So that
sorry?
Medicine also is the same way. It goes through your throat. If you don't want to take it, you're going to get sick. So if you don't want
True,
to take
but typically I've never seen a doctor force medicine down somebody's throat, right? So usually it'll be like, here's the prescription, here's the medicine, now if you want to take it, take it.
Right, exactly.
So that point I understand. So, but I mean the idea of, again, what they mean by religion being forced down the throat, it could mean a lot of things without clarification. I really don't know what the person's, again, what they're alluding to or what they expect me to say. So, I mean, I don't know what to do basically, right? And then the other part of it was, I was under the impression that first of all, this forum, I guess they mean Slido, is for people who believe in Shia Islam. I mean, I guess that's primarily the case. I think most of you are Shia. But if anybody is attending who is not Shia, if they're Sunni or Christian or atheist or, I don't know, a Jedi, vampire, I don't care what you are, you can ask a question. It doesn't matter to me. And then they continued. And clarify your concepts, but to strengthen your beliefs, not vice versa. So I really don't know what that means. I apologize. So inshallah, you can clarify with me later, and then we can try to do something. I don't know. Salawat ala Muhammad. Sorry, I'm really trying here. I don't know what to do with some of these comments. Okay, let's keep going. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala
Narai Hadri! Narai Salawat!
Okay, so I think we have 2 more left, and that should be it. The next one, okay, it's actually a question. I'm trying to decide for my future, and I'm under pressure for my parents to go to medical school, although I'm not interested. What's your opinion? Why do people keep forcing things? Oh, man. Okay. So. Listen. Okay. Being a doctor, it's a good thing. That's good. Being an engineer also is a good thing. Being a programmer is also a good thing. Being a driver is also a good thing. Being a sanitation engineer is also good. Being a teacher is also good. Being a chef is also good. I mean, I have to put it this way, and I have to be, actually, I don't think I want to be politically correct here. So, unfortunately for many individuals, occupations take more priority over everything else in life, right? This is a materialistic way of thinking. Now, deep down, of course, you want your children to be successful. That's great. But the occupation and that amount of income they get is not going to determine their success in life. Especially if you look at a lot of statistics that show that people after a certain amount of wealth are actually unhappier than certain individuals, but it's something else. So yes, if you want to advise your child to go to med school, that's fine, give them advice. If they're not interested, then there's going to be a big problem with that, right? If you want to get them to be interested, you should have a conversation and say, why aren't you interested? Or if they have an interest in something else, then you should ask, okay, what are you interested in and why? Actually have a conversation with them. So I don't say, because sometimes what happens, especially in this country, is, follow your heart and follow your dreams and all that crap, basically. I don't like that stuff either. You have to be able to balance both. You're obviously, especially for the men here, you're going to have to provide for your families, right? So, yeah, if you want to be, let's say, a spoken word artist, that's great, okay? You can keep that, but maybe as a hobby. Maybe get a job so you can provide, and then do your spoken word stuff on the side, right? Maybe. But at the same time, if you're just going to go after money, and that's not going to, for example, make you happy, or you're not doing it with helping your family in mind, or helping the imam, things like this, then you're going to have some stress and anxiety in your life, and that's going to bleed into your family life. And your stress and all your anger is going to come out there, and then it's not going to be a nice house. So, career choices is a whole separate topic. Maybe inshallah later on or something we can discuss that. But parents, well, let me give the fiqh part of it too. So as a child, as a person, you do not have to obey your parents in these kind of matters. Making your parents happy is a good thing. But if they say you have to go to med school, and you decide, and you have a good rational reason for saying no, then you don't have to follow them in that regard. And that's for anything, right? I mean, the obvious things we know. If they tell you to do something haram, you don't follow. That's obvious, right? If they tell you to do something, and it's rational, and you really don't have a good excuse not to, then you should be doing that, right? Making your parents happy is something highly, highly, highly mustahab, right? Let's not dismiss that either. But sometimes parents, they have some, what's the word? Yeah, okay, you said it, not me. There's some hang-ups, they've got some baggage. Some of us, not me, some of them have this British colonial kind of impact still sitting in them. And with that, there's a lot of baggage that's there too, which some of us, or some of you, sorry, don't know. Right? You don't know that it's affected you. And that might mean certain professions are given a certain status, and certain other professions are not. Right? Okay, that's enough for that. Last one. my question. Thank you for a question. Do you sit on the corner of the mimbar because you leave space for your phone and water? Hold on. Or do you allow space for the Ahlul Bayt to sit by you? This is a pretty cool question, I must say. This is probably the most interesting question. So, yeah, definitely a member of the Ahlul Bayt, as far as I know, is not sitting next to me. And I didn't intend on them coming. If they did, that'd be awesome. But I have no idea, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't want to sit next to me like this. So, yeah, it's pretty much for my phone. It's for a few reasons. Yeah, for phone and water. And because the mimbar is kind of like this way, and because we're divided this way, I'm like shifting a little bit to make it slightly more equal, because I don't want to be labeled a misogynist, you know, because some people might have a problem with that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. That's the last of what I saw and found in Slido. If there's any other questions, inshallah, after the program, after ziyarah, those who want to grab their food and come upstairs, we'll try to start like maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes after food. And my humble request is that those who are not interested in having and taking part in the discussion and Q&A, if they could eat downstairs instead of eating up here, so that those who are involved in the discussion we can hear each other. Okay, so I think we can try to wrap up our topic, inshallah. If you can send another salawat ala Muhammad. So, we finished talking about Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We don't have time to go through Surah Fatiha or go through another surah, so we have to skip the idea of recitation. So we're going to go right into the idea of ruku. So, the first thing before we go to ruku is that we have one takbir which is mustahab right before you go to ruku, right? So what is this? They say that, okay, you've done your first takbir when you started, right? Now you're getting ready to change forms. You were standing and now you're switching your form. So the first thing you want to do now is show your beer, Allahu Akbar. You remember how low you are and how great Allah is, and then that should give you that strength and that ideology and philosophy to bow down now. So this is where we have to break up salah into 3 distinct positions. So one we mentioned, which is qiyam, right? So one part of it, you're standing. The other part now, you're bowing. And then the final physical position is when you're in sujood and you're sitting or prostrated. So these 3 different stages represent 3 different types of spiritual battles that we engage in. So what is the qiyam? The qiyam is when a person first starts to let go of their own desires, their own wishes, their own wants, and they begin to realize that they need to start focusing their life on Allah. That's the first thing they have to do. So think about, for example, we already talked about Takbiratul Ihram. Now look at Surah Fatiha. Surah Fatiha is Allah showing us, if you want to talk to me, this is how you do it. If you want to pray to me, this is the way that you should do it. This is the wajib way, the obligatory way, the mandatory way that you have to talk to me every single day. These specific words are what you have to use. Because look, Surah Fatiha is the only one which is basically like a dua. It's Allah telling us how we have to talk and speak to Him. Almost just about, if I'm not mistaken, every other verse of the Quran is either historical, or it has some prediction about the future, or it's a scientific miracle, for example, or a story of a prophet, anything else, right? Something like that. This one is Allah's words of, this is how I want you to speak to me. It's Allah giving you a dua. And this is Allah saying, this is the first thing I want you to recite to me. In these specific words. So what it should show for us is, sometimes we have individuals that say, I don't need to pray, I don't need salah, I don't need namaz, I love God, I'm a good Muslim, I can pray and talk to God however I want. But the first thing Allah is saying is, if you want to be humble, then you pray the way that I'm telling you to pray. He's saying it, not me. No, I'm God, I created you, I'm pretty sure I can tell you exactly what way is beneficial for you to talk to me, and Surah Fatiha is that way. That's why it's very important for us to figure out, what are we saying in this surah? So I encourage everybody who's trying to increase their spirituality and understanding in their salah, definitely go through at least the translation, but definitely also the tafsir of Surah Fatiha. It'll change the way your salah will be. So that's qiyam, right? You're getting ready to focus on God. You're starting to get rid of your ego, your arrogance. Now that's done, now you go down to ruku. What does ruku symbolize? So now you try to get rid of your ego. You're trying to focus on God. If your qiyam and your recitation of the surahs, everything was, let's say, ideally successful, when you go down to ruku, now your focus should be just on God. So now it's you completely focusing on God now. In qiyam, you are starting to get rid of your ego and switch your focus to God. In ruku, you should be humble enough now that the focus is now completely God. Right? So you're turning your attention to Him completely. So what Afas say is, you start to slowly get lost in Allah's names. Right? You start thinking about, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Ghafur, Al-Ghaffar, Al-Azim, and Al-Ali, like all these qualities of God, and you're just thinking like, my whole life is just passing me by, and I thought I knew God, and then you're reflecting and thinking about it, and just like, every time I think about it, Allah, again, it's just something changes in me. Right? I thought I knew Him, but when you reflect again, you just get lost in who He is. You get lost in His names. You get lost in His mercy, His compassion, and His kindness, and His greatness, and His majesty, and all this. That's ruku. Now, after that's done, then you go to sujood. In sujood, they say, the ideal, perfect version of it. So, in qiyam, what happened? You were starting to get rid of your ego, your arrogance, and your sense of self, your identity. Ruku, you were trying to get that complete focus on God. Sujood, if it's done properly, perfectly, ideally, now you are completely engulfed and overwhelmed by Allah. So much so that there is no ego anymore. That's why they say the most humble position that a person can have is in sujood. Because you're not there anymore. It's just you understanding and connecting to God. There is no sense of self anymore. There is no I, man, ana, me. That's gone. You left your ego behind. You're not even thinking about God's names like, oh, He's this name or 99 names. None of that's there too. It's nothing but this overwhelming understanding and like complete love and connection to Allah. That's real sujood. Okay. Now let's step back. Let's go a bit deeper into the idea of ruku and see if we can build our own understanding of that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So first, just as we did with all the other parts of Salah, we want to mention some of the benefits. Like some of the ideal things that if we do it correctly, this is what we'll be receiving inshallah. So the first hadith comes from our fifth Imam, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. He says, anyone who performs his ruku perfectly, this person will be safe from the horror of the grave. Now, I'm not somebody that likes to discuss kind of the scary parts of like hell and the grave and all that, because some people get freaked out. But we know there's concepts in Islam, right? In the afterlife, when you're dying or you're about to die, when your soul is getting pulled away from your body as you're dying, as you're being questioned in the grave, while you're in the grave, as you go to barzakh, all of these things could either be a good experience for you, or they can be a tough experience for you, a really bad experience. So one of the things they talk about is this wahsha fil qabr, this horror, this fear that people have in their graves. And some of the reason that the ulama give is that if we weren't living lives focused on God, if we weren't really thinking about the afterlife in this world, then what's going to happen is that when we die, it's going to be a complete shock to us. So let me give an analogy or an example. So, if for example, let's say you're asleep, you're slowly trying to wake up, right? And then somebody turns on these bright lights, shines them in your face, plays like loud sounds and things like that. You get freaked out, right? You like jump out of bed, or you'll get you'll get shocked or whatever. It'll mess up your eyes, right? Your eyes will start hurting for a little bit, right? Because that blinding light was in your eyes when you weren't ready to wake up yet. If, let's say, you had some of those like dimmers, or you allowed the sunrise to gradually wake you up, then it would be easy for you, right? But if somebody's just gonna flash sounds or light while you're sleeping, then it's gonna be much harsher for you. Death will be the same thing. If we prepare ourselves little by little here, then when we die, it'll be a nice and slow transition. And it'll be very, very easy. And we have stories, I'm not even going to mention like ulama and things like that. Just general mu'mineen. And I'm sure maybe if you've been at somebody at their time of death, like for example, when I was with my mother, we saw these things in her as well, where she'd be mentioning, okay, Imam Ali is over here sending salams, Bibi Fatima is here sending her salams. And those who had lived their life in this kind of way, like my mother did, and many individuals that we know in our lives, they start to get visited by the Imams early on in the Ahlul Bayt to help them make that transition. And if that's the kind of thing that we want, then we have to make sure we establish that connection now. Because if we don't do it, then it's going to be like that light switch while we're sleeping. It'll be like somebody, again, playing a horn or a loud sound while we're sleeping. It'll just shock us, and we'll get freaked out. That's what the horror of the grave is. And we don't want that. And that's why we have this hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa where he says, Mutu qabla an tamutu, which literally means die before you die. So the ulama explained that it means die a spiritual death before you die physically, your physical death. Get rid of your ego, get rid of your connections to this world, so that when you actually die physically, then it won't be a big change for you. Like, yeah, I had given up my worldly addictions. I wasn't a person who had this addiction and love for the world. So when I'm pulled away from it, whatever, it's not a big deal for me. So for example, sometimes I've seen this with certain kids, where they're really not attached to their phone or games or TV or their computer or whatever. So if their parents try to punish them and say, you know what, no phone for the rest of the day or for the week, like, okay, fine, I'll read a book, right? They're fine with it. Like, it's not a big deal for them, because they're not attached, they're not addicted to that. I'm not trying to ruin your punishments, obviously, but I mean, if your kid is not being affected by that, that's actually a pretty good thing, I think, right? So the fifth Imam is saying that if we learn to perform our ruku perfectly, which maybe means if we're learning to be humble perfectly and get focused on God, then we'll be saved from that fear and horror in the grave. Another one we have from the sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He says it will increase your life, like it'll extend your life doing ruku perfectly, and it'll scare shaitan away. So that, I think, is self-explanatory. We're going to explain that. Okay, so these are the benefits. Now, what's some of the secrets behind ruku? So many of us have heard the story of the Prophet's Mi'raj, right? His ascension. He had been raised spiritually to the higher realms, right? And had this quote-unquote meeting with God. And he went from level to level to level, transcending all these different dimensions, till he finally quote-unquote saw God, spoke to him, etc. So in the Mi'raj, right, the hadith that's there, it's a long hadith. There's a lot of things that the Prophet experienced. So for anybody who's interested, you can search it, the translations online about the Prophet's Mi'raj, and see what he went through. See what he said, see who he talked to, see the things that he learned. And a lot of the wisdoms about certain actions are found because the Prophet had seen things or done things in that Mi'raj. So, for example, ruku. At one point, when he had reached this high level, right, he's going higher and higher, getting more and more connected to Allah. And Allah tells the Prophet now, he says, look at my arsh, look at my divine throne. So the Prophet is saying, I looked at Allah's throne, his divine arsh. He's like, and I just got blown away. I was amazed. I was filled with awe. It was like amazing. So I looked at a greatness which astounded my soul. He's like, and then I almost fainted, right? I was in a swoon. Like, he started like losing himself, basically. And therefore, he got inspired to say, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim wa bihamdi. So that's where this mustahab dhikr comes from. This was the Prophet, when he saw what had happened, when he saw Allah's arsh and he just was blown away by it, he started shaking. He was overcome with this love and connection. So he said, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim wa bihamdi, right? Which literal translation meaning, glory be to my great Lord and praise be to him. Now again, I don't have time to go through a full kind of tafsir of that. But Subhan or Subhanallah is basically when somebody recognizes and understands that Allah is free from any sort of defect, any sort of deficiency. There's no gap in what Allah has. There's no weakness that we can ascribe to him. It's interesting if you look at the actual Arabic, right? So Subhan, right? Subh, this idea of doing tasbih. Subh, the original meaning of it is about swimming. So we're like, okay, from swimming, coming to glorifying God, like what's the connection? So one of the scholars explains that, think about somebody who's in water, underwater, and they're swimming. They are completely surrounded by water. You can't say to that person that there's one spot of water that's not touching you. Every single part of them, their whole body is being touched and connected to water, every single way. Right? There's no gap, there's no lack of water on them, right? They're completely wet or submerged and surrounded by water. So they make this connection that when we're saying Subhanallah, we are recognizing all goodness, all khair. That's what Allah is. He's just surrounded by this constantly. There's no gaps, there's no like space where He's weak, which sometimes we think that, you know, Allah, why'd you let this bad thing happen in my life, right? That's a weakness that we might ascribe to Him. Na'udhu billah. So when we say Subhanallah, it's usually in reaction to something like, let's say you see a really full moon, or you see something beautiful like one of the natural wonders of the world, or you, for example, for those who have not been to Mashhad, the first time you see, especially the Haram of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, there's no response you can have except for Subhanallah. That Haram is something else. The way that, alhamdulillah, it's been built year after year after year, it's an amazing place. Same way when you go to Karbala and you see the dome of Imam Hussein, Hazrat Abbas. Again, you see this beauty, you see this greatness, and you just kind of get lost in it, right? And the only thing you can think about is how amazing it is. So you just recognize that it's all good. It's all great, right? That's what Subhanallah recognizes. And then of course you say, wa bihamdi. And you know, Allah, I thank you for allowing me to recognize that. And then the Prophet continues. He said, so as I was, you know, I saw the arsh, I was looking at this thing, I was like dumbfounded, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I was trying to gain my composure back, right? He's like almost falling unconscious. He's fainting because of how amazing Allah's arsh is, His throne is. He says, as I did that, as I was trying to gain control of myself, I bowed down and I grabbed my knees so that I could control myself. I wanted to show Allah my humility and how great, and you know, show Him that I understand and recognize His greatness. So they say this is the secret of, in the history, the historical spiritual history of the ruku. It was the Prophet's natural response to seeing how great Allah's throne is. And he went down and said, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim wa bihamdi, recognizing that Allah is beyond what we can understand, so great. And he thanked Allah for allowing him to see things like that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, the next spiritual or philosophical understanding that can help us. So in our different languages, our mother tongues, we have these different concepts. So for some of us, we use this word takalluf. In Farsi, we would say ta'aruf, which usually doesn't really have an English equivalent, right? It's a way of being. It's a way of acting. The closest concept that I want to describe, it's not exactly the same, I know that, but it's a concept I want to talk about, is this idea of politeness or showing courtesy and respect. So let me give you an example or a thought experiment. So let's say, for example, I ask Zain, I'm like, you know, when I say to Zain, no, I want water, right? That's my desire, my intention, that's what I want. So I say, Zain, get me water. It's an experiment, right? Thank you. So I can say, get me some water, get me water. So I'm giving him a command. Now you saw, he was ready to go. So I could say that. I could also say it a different way. I could say, could you get me some water? I could do it another way. I could say, please, could you get me some water? Or I could say, sorry to bother you. I'm really thirsty. So if it's not too much trouble and it's not an inconvenience, would you mind getting me some water, please? Now, obviously, each of those things, naturally, you can see that there's a different effect on the way that I'm acting and the way that Zain or anybody else would react to that kind of request or command, right? So what's the difference here? What's the difference in all those different levels? The difference in comparison lies in the amount of humility that you're going to show to the person that you're making this darkhast and this request. You can either give a command and show no respect to the person at all and say, you know, Pani Pilau, get me water. I'll be all right. You can do that very easily. And maybe they'll do that. And sometimes as elders, we like to use the fact that we have some authority and say, well, I don't need to do that. I don't need to show any sort of humility to somebody who's younger than me, right? But the other part of it is that it also shows consideration for the other party, the person that you're requesting from. You're showing that, you know what, I understand that you have free will, that you could be doing anything that you want, that it's not wajib, but you don't have to do this. But in consideration and understanding your time and your patience and all this, I want to ask in a different manner. I don't want to just command you and tell you what to do. I want to show that I recognize who you are, that I'm not better than you, that I'm not deserving of anything. That's why I want to ask in a different way. So we use these polite terms, being courteous, having these sort of kind of like etiquettes and adab. We do this to show people humility and consideration for who they are, right? Because we're doing favors. The person's doing me a favor, I should reflect that while I do that, right? So one natural thing that this kind of courteousness and politeness does is that it obviously brings people closer together, right? So if you say this to an individual, imagine you're doing it at especially in the service industry, right? At the airport, for a cashier, customer service, you could say, return this, I want my money back. They might give it to you, they might not. But if you say, sorry to bother you, I'm sure you were having a tough time, whatever, and blah, 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 you've had a long day. I got this item, I really didn't like it, and is there any way possible, if you don't mind, could we return this or do something with it? They're usually going to be much more responsive to you, naturally, right? Because their defenses are down. You are showing them, you're telling the person, I acknowledge that I don't have any rights over you. That you could be doing me a favor, but you don't have to. I'm humbling myself in front of you. And when you do that, the person recognizes, oh, you're actually putting me on a pedestal? Okay, so now that you're making me feel so high, then yeah, like a king or a queen, let me do you a favor, right? They'll feel that natural inclination to do that. So we've seen this in our lives. When you show more politeness, more courtesy, you are much more likely to get a favor done for you, right? So now, what does this have to do with ruku? This we can tie into a hadith from, again, the sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, fi ruku' adab. The secret within this idea of bowing and doing ruku' is that it's an adab. It's adab. It's a courtesy. It's politeness. It's you showing humility. It's you showing consideration for the person that you're bowing to. Say, okay. Now, in the example I gave, I was showing this politeness to Zayn, for example, because I wanted water. So I would actually get a result from it, right? So I'm showing this politeness and being courteous, this ta'aruf, takalluf, whatever. The whole point is to get something in return. Or bring people together, do something. So ruku, if I'm doing that as a courtesy, or a politeness, or modesty, whatever, what am I getting in return? So the Imam continues. He says, وَفِي سُجُودٍ قُرْبٍ. That closeness in sujood, that's what you get. That's your gift. Ruku is basically you getting permission to go into sujood. Allah saying, through the words of the Imam here, that ruku is you showing that, I am a humble individual, Allah, I understand who you are, I consider the fact that you've been doing me favors constantly, and I want to show the utmost amount of grace, of graciousness and gratitude and thankfulness. I want to show that to you in the most perfect way possible. How can I show that to you? And then if he accepts that ruku, then you are now allowed to go into sujood. That's the gift. So Imam says, وَفِي سُجُود قُرْبٍ. That qurb, that closeness, that proximity, that's what you get in sujood. And he continues, وَمَنْ لَا يَحْسُنُ الْأَدَبِ. And whoever doesn't do the adab, whoever's adab and their courtesy and politeness isn't good, لَا يَصْلُحُ لِلْقُرْبِ. You don't deserve that qurb. You don't deserve to get close to God. If you don't show politeness to the person that you're trying to get this favor from, then you don't deserve the favor. You really don't deserve it. The Imam's saying, if you don't show proper humility and proper ma'rifat and understanding in your ruku, then your sujood is not going to have any value. All these things we hear about, that sujood is the best position for a mu'min and how great it is, it breaks shaitan's back, all this stuff. And we don't feel it. Why? Maybe it's because our ruku wasn't done properly. We didn't do it good enough, right? We weren't showing that politeness. Try it now, inshallah, in your next salah. See if you can have a better connection in ruku and see how that might change your sujood. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Now this is possibly also why we see in this famous narration when the Prophet saw somebody in the masjid praying really, really fast, right? He said that this person is like pecking like a crow, right? Just like boom, like that, right? In his ruku. So he says that this person, when he's describing him, he's just like a crow he just pecks and goes. If this person dies, like leaves this world, and this is the way that he does his salah, then he won't have died under my deen. He won't have died under my religion. which is possibly the Prophet saying, my religion, meaning Islam, is trying to get that marifah, trying for us to destroy our ego. If a person is just doing this quick ruku, how could you have gotten closer to Allah like that? It's impossible. At least, again, I mean, now some of you who are like, yeah, aren't you praying kind of fast in the Jamaat prayer? I'm like, I don't know if it's a crow's peck, it's not that fast, but khair. That slowness or that fastness, even if, let's say, you only say Subhana Rabbiyal Azim one time, but you're doing it with ma'rifah. Again, if you do it, even a small word, even if somebody says, sometimes people will say please to you 100 times. Please, 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 can I have this or buy this or whatever. And it won't mean much. But somebody, if they're actually saying it from the bottom of their hearts, can I please bother you for a second? Can I please get this? You can feel their sincerity. You can feel their politeness. You can feel the truth in what they're talking about and their humility. So you can do that even if you say it only once. Again, not all maraji allow you to say it once. You can check with yours. But whatever. So the amount of times you say it might not matter. Although we know the imams, they would say it 30, 60, hundreds of thousands of times because they could do that. And they could be sincere in every single time they said it. For us, let's try to figure out if we can do it at least once and have that connection. Then once we can establish it at least once, again, if your marja allows reciting it once, but at least focusing once, then see now, if I can do it 3 times, 5 times, 7 times, then you can extend it. And that might make your ruku and then your sujood much stronger. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala So we won't have time, unfortunately, to go into sujood because we don't have time, obviously. And I also wanted to recap everything we did, but I think Dr. Qarab had done a good job of recapping a lot of the points that were discussed. So I'll mention just one hadith about sujood, or actually I think I can quickly read through some of these, just to give you the benefits and wisdoms of what the sujood means, and then we'll move on to the musibah, inshallah. So we have this hadith from, a few different hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And I'll skip the Arabic. So he says, make your sujood longer, right? Prolong your sujood. Because there's nothing that's more agonizing and hurtful for shaitan than to see a person, a human being, in sujood. Why? Because he was the one who was commanded to do sujood and he couldn't do it. So it's like somebody asking you, 2 different individuals, testing them both, saying, okay, whatever, let's say it's the water one, right? So I asked 2 people, hey, who can go get me water? Who will get me water? And one of you does it, the other one doesn't. So now that one who didn't do it, who now is not, let's say, my best friend now, so they're going to hate Zayn every time that he gets water. Every time it's going to remind him, like, this thing, like, this is what caused me to go to hell, for example. So shaitan knows that this is what screwed me up. So whenever he sees insan doing that, showing that humility that he couldn't show, this destroys him. Next hadith is that, again, from the Imam, is that the zahir, the general external meaning of sujood is when you place your forehead on the ground, you do it with sincerity and humility, as we mentioned. But there's a batin too. There's a more irfani, spiritual meaning, which is that it's, putting your forehead on the ground is detaching your heart from anything which can be destroyed, anything which is perishable, things which won't last. It's showing your attachment of your heart to things which are eternal, which is the afterlife, which is Allah, which is the messages of the Ahlul Bayt. It's a relief in you moving away from arrogance and pride and fanaticism and anything which is hubb dunya and dunyawi and worldly. And then this famous one which we've all heard before, which is that the first sujood, because we do it, we're going up and down a few times, right? The first time when you go down for sujood, showing that I was dust in the beginning. I was dirt. I came from dirt. As you raise your head, that this is your birth. I came from that dirt. You go back down again. This means that when we die, we're going to go and return back to earth, into dirt. And when we raise our heads for that last time, this symbolizes Yawm al-Qiyamah, when we'll be raised from the dirt on the day of resurrection from our graves. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So before we go on to the musibah, just a few words. I wanted to first thank Allah for this opportunity. For the 3rd or 4th time I've been here, it's been better. It's been a better experience every time. With all those other comments and questions and stuff aside, right? Alhamdulillah, it was nice. So I thank everybody who's helped organize these programs, these majalis. those who have helped out with transportation, those who have sponsored and provided the tabarruk and the niyaz, those who have cleaned after us. You know, people like that don't get enough thanks, so we thank Allah and ask Allah to thank them and give them their proper reward for doing the work in service of the Ahlul Bayt and serving those who love the Ahlul Bayt. Those who have made our hearts softer by reciting poetry and had made this azan experience a better experience for us, so we can all spiritually grow together. I thank the board for the kind invitation. If there was anything that I had done which was offensive or upsetting or incorrect, then I ask for your forgiveness, and please give me the chance to correct it or to offer another explanation if possible. And if there was any sort of benefit from any of these nights, all khair comes from Allah, and we thank Allah for that tawfiq and that opportunity. So, inshallah, we pray for the success of this community. Hopefully, if Allah gives me the tawfiq to ever come back, hopefully we can see each other in your new center, which again, I encourage everyone, try to make it your goal for this month of Muharram to make sure that your center is going to be purchased for and paid off, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala For most of us, we think that the tragedy of Karbala has come to a close. We say that after Sham al-Ghariba, that's it, the shahadat has ended, the killing has stopped. So Karbala has come to an end. But the ghurba, the madlumiyya, the dhulm has just begun. For the Ahlul Bayt, now the real tragedy begins. The women, the children, they are now going to be going through the toughest experiences of their lives. Being paraded around from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham, before finally being released and allowed to go back to Medina. From here onwards now, the message of Karbala has to be spread. The Ahlul Bayt don't even get a chance to grieve and mourn and do azab properly. Because of the wazifa and the duty on their shoulders, they have to strengthen themselves, have patience, and go and spread the message and tell the Muslims what happened in Karbala. Zainab, one of the last things that Hussein had told his sister Zainab is, you have to have patience. You have to protect my son Imam Sajjad after me, after I go, because he's still sick. It's on your shoulders now to spread this message and to continue the message of wilayah. Tell people what happened on this day. After Sham al-Ghariba passes, things start to set in with the family and companions or the leftover members of the Ahlul Bayt. We're told that after the Yazidi forces had taken everything, they had burned the tents down, after some peace and quiet had come to the Ahlul Bayt after getting a little bit of water from the wife of Hur, now more dhulm begins. A few hours ago, Shimr was slapping and torturing the daughter of Hussein, Sakinatul Hussein. But Shimr's torture hasn't ended. Now he goes and he looks at Abd Bimar laying down on a mattress, and he wants to enact more of his anger and rage and torture on this Imam. He takes out his whip and begins whipping the Imam for no reason. And he even says to Umar ibn Sa'd that he wants to kill the individual, but he's stopped from doing that. Zainab is the one who has to come and stop Shimr from doing this. She's saving Imam constantly, over and over and over again. Now, the horses and the camels are all lined up. The women of the Ahlul Bayt are tied in ropes and chains. But for Imam Zainul Abidin, there's something different for him. When the soldiers come to him, they don't give him ropes. They take these chains which are not normally used. When you put an iron collar around somebody's neck, normally it's just a circular piece of iron. But for Imam Sajjad, they tightly wrapped around this iron collar so that in the burning sands, in the burning heat of Karbala, it would burn his throat constantly. So that every time he tried to move, it would burn him even more. They took nails from the outside and hammered it into his throat, so that every time he tried to swallow, every time he wanted to speak, he would be cut over and over and over again. We have a narration from Imam Baqir that he says, when I was giving the ghusl to my father after he became shaheed, after he passed, when I was giving him ghusl and I saw his body, I saw the marks of lashes from Shimr on that day. I had never seen them before. I had seen where skin had peeled off on his body because of the whips, the whipping. I saw the bruises on his neck from that iron collar which was fixed into his throat. They say that the Imam was dealing with so much pain that he would be fainting over and over and over again because he was still sick. And when he would faint and wouldn't go onto the camel and move forward, Shimmer would come again and begin whipping him again so he would wake up. And when the women and children wouldn't go onto the camels and they would move slowly, Shimmer would come to them and begin whipping them as well. And when Imam Sajjad or Zainab saw that the women and children were being whipped, they would do something. They would fall off of their camels on purpose so that they would get the whippings instead. The whole caravan, the whole time from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham, everyone was taking turns being burnt, being whipped, being slapped over and over and over again. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, let me tell you the most difficult thing. Ajrukum ala Allah. We talk about the different relationships in Karbala. We talk about Zainab and Hussein. We talk about Sakina and Hussein. We talk about Hussein and Abbas. We talk about Hussein and Akbar. But there's one relationship that people don't usually talk about on the minbar, and that's another brother and sister, not Hussein and Zainab. We never discuss the relationship between Imam Sajjad and Sakina. How difficult was it for Imam Sajjad to be put on this camel being taken, seeing his younger sister being whipped and slapped constantly and not being able to do a thing about it? In his heart he's thinking, the only thing I wish I could do is go and take care of my little sister. And Sakina's looking at her older brother being whipped and tortured like this the whole time, saying, I just want to go and take care of my older brother. Ajrukum ala Allah. And one final point from Mu'mini Mu'minat, then we move on to Ya Hussein. When at times the caravans would stop, they would stop for the night and try to rest. When this would happen, they say that they would stop, they would tie Imam Sajjad to a pole. And the women would be laying down in their camps, they would be trying to sleep. One night, as they were walking, as they were being forced to walk through the sands in Karbala, as they were barefoot, sometimes there would be thorns along the way. And when they saw this, the Yazidi forces would make Imam Sajjad step on each and every thorn and make sure the path went through that he would have to step on each of these thorns. So he's having pain in his throat, being sharply stabbing him there. He has thorns in his legs and his feet. When Sakina in the middle of the night sees this, she wakes up, still being tied up. She goes over to Imam Sajjad, begins pulling out the thorns one by one, and begins kissing the feet of her older brother. Imam Sajjad says, if my hands weren't tied, I would hug you right now. But I can't do anything to you. My heart is breaking, but it's like I can't hug my little sister. But he says, but you can't let the forces of Yazid see you like this. If they find out that we're brother and sister, they're going to torture us even more. And when a soldier came out and saw that Sakina was crying this way when she saw Imam Sajjad being tortured, then they realized, Shimmer said, this must be their brothers and sisters, and this is when the torture on Sajjad and Sakina increased even more. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to forgive all mu'mineen, mu'minat, muslimin, muslimat, all of our marhumin, marhumat. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to give us the patience, increase our patience so that we can reach the level of the patience and sabr that the Ahlul Bayt had when they endured all this torture. Ya Allah, those who are going through difficult times in their lives, we ask you to help us, remember the bala and the grief of the Ahlul Bayt so that it makes our bala easier. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to help us raise our children, our young children, our elder children, to be like those younger children at Karbala who had to face these calamities and who went from city to city defending the message of Islam. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, the Shuhada of Karbala, and all of this azadari, to accept everything that we've offered in these past 14 nights, to make sure that we can continue this every day, every year, and that our connection to the Ahlul Bayt gets stronger and stronger. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. يا حسين.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein,
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، میرے بھائی میرے بے کس میرے مظلوم امام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، ہو کے ہم قید یوں ہی چلتے رہیں گے کب تک، غم سہیں گے کب تک، ہو کے ہم قید یوں ہی چلتے رہیں گے کب تک، غم سہیں گے کب تک، کب کھلے گی یہ رسن، کب یہ سفر ہوگا تمام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، ضبط کرنے کے لیے کون سا دل لاؤں میں، کاش کے مر جاؤں میں، ضبط کرنے کے لیے کون سا دل لاؤں میں، کاش کے مر جاؤں میں، عورتیں دیکھتی ہیں یہ تماشا لب بام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، رو بابا تو نام میں درے کھاؤں اور تماچے کھاؤں، رو بابا تو نام میں درے کھاؤں اور تماچے کھاؤں، میں وہ بیٹی ہوں جو لے سکتی نہیں باپ کا نام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، روکے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، کیا بھی دور ہے شام، صدقے کر کے کھجوریں جو یہ سب دیکھتے ہیں دیکھتے ہیں صدقے کر کے کھجورے جو یہ سب پھینکتے ہیں ہم یہ کیا دیکھتے ہیں ہم تو سادات ہیں سادات پہ صدقہ ہے حرام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام جو کہ سجاد سے سرزی کی سکینہ یہ کلام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کسی منزل پہ ترس کھائیں گے ہم پر یہ لئی کوئی امید نہیں کسی منزل پہ ترس کھائیں گے ہم پر یہ لئی کوئی امید نہیں ہم غریبوں کے مقدر میں کہاں اب آرام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام رو کے سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام غیرت نفس میری خون رلاتی ہے مجھے شرم آتی ہے مجھے غیرت نفس میری خون رلاتی ہے مجھے شرم آتی ہے مجھے بال چھوٹے ہے تو چپتا نہیں چہرہ بھی تمام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام جو کہ سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام ابھی زندہ کے اندھیروں سے گزرنا ہے مجھے وہی مرنا ہے مجھے ابھی زندہ کے اندھیروں سے گزرنا ہے مجھے وہی مرنا ہے مجھے قید خانے کے اندھیرے ہی لکھے ہیں میرے نام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام لوگ سجاد سے کرتی تھی سکینہ یہ کلام کیا بھی دور ہے شام کیا بھی دور ہے شام یا حسین 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 یا حسین
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے گھر میں ہمارے آئے کے مجلس میں فاطمہ گھر میں ہمارے آئے کے مجلس میں فاطمہ فرش عزا کے ساتھ یہ دل بھی بچھائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے یہ شبیہ یہ تعزیے
یعنی بھولے ہماری یہ شبیہ یہ تعزیے
عزیز غم سے درد کے منظر ہم منظر سجائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
یہ ان کا ہے جلوس جو پیاسے ہوئے شہید
یہ ان کا ہے جلوس جو پیاسے ہوئے شہید
ہم اس کے راستے میں سبیلے لگائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
رہتے ہیں چھوٹے چھوٹے سے بچے یہ باپ سے
یعنی کہتے ہیں چھوٹے چھوٹے سے بچے یہ باپ سے
ایک روز بابا جائے علم ہم اٹھائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
کچھ دیر ذوالجلال میرے گھر کے روک دو
کچھ دیر ذوالجلال میرے گھر پہ روک دو
پیاسے کی اس سواری کو پانی پلائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
بچپن سے ہے دعا کہ بنائے گر جہاں
بچپن سے ہے دعا کہ بنائے گر جہاں
عاشور خانہ گھر میں وہاں ہم سجائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
گھر میں اگر ہو نظر سکینہ تو ہے یقین
گھر میں اگر ہو نظر سکینہ تو ہے یقین
اس نظر میں سکینہ کے امو بھی آئیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
مسلے بچھائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
بچوں کو اپنے سجدہ شبیر کی قسم
یعنی بچوں کو اپنے سجدہ شبیر کی قسم
ماتم کے ساتھ ساتھ نمازیں
سکھائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے
راہ حسینیت کے شہید و سلام لو
راہ حسینیت کے شہید و سلام دو
ان کو نہ اپنے دل سے کبھی ہم بلائیں گے
زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے زندہ رہے حسین تیرا غم منائیں گے یا حسین 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 یا حسین
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
لگتا ہے کہ زہرا کی
دعا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
دیکھ سکینہ تیرے عباس کا لاشا دیکھ سکینہ تیرے عباس کا لاشا دریا کے کنارے پہ قضا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
یوں بھی گرتی جاتی ہیں فضا چھو کے علم کو یوں بھی گرتی جاتی ہے فضا چھو کے علم کو جیسے کہ یہ زینب کی ردا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
سارے اپنا پٹکتا ہے کناروں پہ یہ پانی سارے اپنا پٹکتا ہے کناروں پہ یہ پانی یا عرش کو ماتم کی صدا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
بہتا ہوا پانی ہے کہ عباس کے آنسو بہتا امت کی جفا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
سر چوم کے غازی کا کہا ابن علی نے سر چوم کے غازی کا کہا ابن علی نے عباس قدم تیرے وفا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
جواد یہ نوحہ ہے شہنشاہ وفا کا جواد یہ نوحہ ہے شہنشاہ وفا کا ہر لفظ کو اشکوں کی گھٹا چوم رہی ہے
عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے
لگتا ہے کہ زہرا کی
لگتا ہے کہ زہرا کی دعا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے عباس کے پرچم کو ہوا چوم رہی ہے یا حسین 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 یا حسین
شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے
ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے
عظمت جاری رہے
تذکرہ جاری رہے
عظمت اسلام کو تمہیں بچایا حسین جو نہ کوئی کر سکا کر کے دکھایا حسین
کر کے دکھایا حسین کر کے دکھایا حسین
ہمت دکھایا حسین ہمت شبیر کا تذکرہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا
سلسلہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری رہے
10 محرم کے دن کیسی خیانت ہوئی
یا حسین
اردو کلا ساتھی سب کی شہادت ہوئی
سب کی شہادت ہوئی سب کی شہادت ہوئی
کربلا والوں کے یہ تذکرہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا
سلسلہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری رہے
عالم انسانیت اشک بہاتے رہے ذکر حسین غریب سب کو سناتے رہے
سب کو سناتے رہے
سب کو سناتے رہے سب کو سناتے
رہے
غربت شبیر کا تذکرہ جاری رہے ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے
ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری رہے تذکرہ جاری
رہے عطرت اطہار کا انس غمخوار تھا میں مارا گیا وہ جو علمدار تھا
وہ جو علمدار تھا وہ جو علمدار
سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے۔ جس گھڑی مارا گیا اکبر کڑیل جوان، من میں نکل آئی تھی روتی ہوئی بیویاں، روتی ہوئی بیویاں، روتی ہوئی بیویاں، روتی ہوئی بیویاں۔ دلبر شبیر کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے۔ سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے۔ عصر کا ہنگام تھا، ہوتے تھے آدھے ابا، کوئی میئر پہ کھڑا عابد بیمار تھا، عابد بیمار تھا، عابد بیمار تھا۔ عابد بیمار کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے۔ سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے۔ خون کا دریا بہا، درد کا طوفان اٹھا، قتل محمد کا جب پیارا نوازا ہوا، پیارا نوازا ہوا، پیارا نوازا ہوا، پیارا نوازا ہوا۔ اس غم اندوہ کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے۔ سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے۔ حشر تک ہوگا کلم ماتم سبتے نبی، عمر بھر روتی رہی بھائی کو بنتے علی، بھائی کو بنتے علی، بھائی کو بنتے علی، بھائی کو بنتے علی۔ زینب دلگیر کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے، ماتم شبیر کا سلسلہ جاری رہے۔ سید مظلوم کا تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے، تذکرہ جاری رہے۔ صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا۔ ہم دیتے ہیں پرسہ تمہیں عباس جری کا، ہم دیتے ہیں پرسہ تمہیں عباس جری کا، ہم دیتے ہیں پرسہ تمہیں عباس جری کا، اور اکبر دلگیر کا یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا۔ زینب کے پسر کون محمد کا بھی پرسا، زینب کے پسر کون محمد کا بھی پرسا، زینب کا پسر کون محمد کا بھی پرسا، اور اصغر بشیر کا یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا۔ عباس جو لشکر کا تصور کے علمدار، عباس جو لشکر کا تصور کے علمدار، عباس جو لشکر کا تصور کے علمدار، دریا پہ اسے نقل کیا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا۔ کانوں سے سکینہ کے اتارے گئے گوہر، کانوں سے سکینہ کے اتارے گئے گوہر، کانوں سے سکینہ کے اتارے گئے گوہر، زینب کی بھی چھینی ہے رضا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا، ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا۔ بیڑی پنائے تھوڑی بدن زخمی کر دیا، بیڑی پنائے تھوڑی بدن زخمی کر دیا، بیڑی پنائے تھوڑی بدن زخمی کر دیا، سجاد پہ یہ ظلم کیا فاطمہ زہرا صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا صلوات و سلام آپ پہ یا فاطمہ زہرا ہم آئے ہیں پرسے کے لیے فاطمہ زہرا
الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا حبيب الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بكيت بكي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام